First, I would like to congratulate you on initiating a new observatory on addiction at this time. I think it is something that is highly needed. Second, I would like to say how honored I am that I have a role from so far away in Canada that you are giving me a role in being part of the new observatory. I would like to comment a little on our Canadian experience because I think it is very relevant to what you are doing here. We in Canada, of course, are under the influence in everything of the United States because we are so close. We are very, very close. And that means that our drug policy position was pretty much determined by the United States beginning early in the 20th century and right up to approximately 1965. We were very much under the wing of the United States. And something magical happened in 1965, which is that somehow, for some magical reason, which I do not know, we began to think freely on our own. At that point, we started our own equivalents of observatories. We started the Addiction Research Foundation in Eastern Canada. We started a brand new university in Vancouver in Western Canada, which is Simon Fraser University. We started something called the Portland Hotel Society. And we eventually started the British Columbia Center on Substance Abuse. These are all, in my mind, something like your new observatory. These are independent think tanks or research groups or policy groups, which are designed to improve a very, very bad situation. Up till 1965, our addiction situation was extremely bad. We had lots of police brutality. We had a steadily growing problem. We had lots of people in prison, and we weren't getting anywhere. After 1965, with our new research institutions, things began to change. And we had a big win, and we also had a big disappointment. And I want to tell you briefly what the big win was and what the big disappointment was. The big win was that we got over the war on drugs. We stopped the police brutality. We stopped sending so many people to prison. We stopped making the problem worse with our policy. We had a policy which basically made the problem worse, and we stopped it. And you can see that in my city. If you could come here with magic eyes and you would look at the two big prisons that we have in the city, which were, in 1965, they were primarily filled with drug users. There were other criminals, of course, but most of the people in those two big prisons, and I mean big prisons, were drug users. Now, if you come and you look at those places, you won't see the prisons. The prisons are gone. They have been torn down, and in those places there are very nice houses, and our people are living in the houses, and children are playing in the backyard, and most of those people don't even know that where they live was once a prison. That's our big success. We now do not make the problem worse by taking children from the streets and throwing them into prison for a little bit of powder in their pocket and they stay in prison and become criminals. No, we don't do that anymore. We don't have the police brutality anymore. That's our big win. Our big disappointment, however, is that our drug addiction situation is almost as bad as it was before. That is, we still have lots and lots of drug addicts, and we still have a big overdose problem, and parents still worry about their children becoming addicted. We've solved the problem of making the problem worse. We no longer make the problem worse with our big prisons and our police brutality, but we have not got to the bottom yet of why our addiction problem occurs in the first place. And that's why our research efforts have to continue. Even though we did a lot of research, we did a lot of policy activism after 1965, and all that led to a major success, we are now continuing because we have another success that we haven't had yet. And that is we have to be able to understand where addiction comes from. Now we have a clue. We have a big clue, which is that we no longer think that it comes from drugs, which we used to think that there were devils in the drugs and that the devils would somehow click a switch in a person's brain and transform a normal person into a drug addict. We used to believe that, but our research is very clear. That's not what happens. Mm-hmm. We now know that there's nothing all that special about these particular drugs that are our drugs of addiction. The devil is not in the drugs. We now know that the devil is in the kinds of social conditions which make people addicted. And we know that some of those social conditions have to do with poverty, of course, but some of them don't have to do with poverty. For example, in my city, which is a rich city, we have very poor people and they have big addiction problems, but we also have big addiction problems among our middle class and among our rich people. So we know that the addiction problem is complicated and we have not solved it yet. And that is why the research must continue. And I started by saying that we were at one time dominated by American research in this area. Well, we are no longer. We're on our own. And the research that we're doing is about where addiction comes from in Canada. We're not trying to find God's truth about where addiction comes from everywhere in the world. We want to know where it comes from in Canada, and we will. This is my main recommendation to you in Brazil as you start this new observatory for addiction. Make sure, in my opinion, you should make sure that your research is oriented towards Brazil. Where does the addiction come from in Brazil or in a particular part of Brazil where the observatory will be located? Make sure the research speaks to the real people in real situations and is not done in terms of ideology or an attempt to find a great metaphysical solution to problems. Make sure that the research speaks to the problem right where you are. And that my other recommendation is, and this is based on my Canadian experience, so it may not be relevant to you, but I say it in case it is relevant to you. My other experience is that make sure that your observatory includes lots of input from people who are not part of government and people who are not part of professional associations. In other words, from people, from people from the streets, from people who are dealing with problems, because they have a particular kind of wisdom, which is what you must find. Now, this is not to say that you should pay no attention to professionals. I'm a professional psychologist myself. Of course, you should pay attention to professionals, but my hope is that your observatory will be open to all kinds of input from many kinds of people. Thank you very much.